And welcome to all of you, and thank you for coming. One of the things that strikes me is connection. And we just said the lineage prayer, which is probably the most important thing that exists on this earth, that connection. And the unbroken connection of the Kargyu lineage is beyond precious. It's something that is incredibly rare. And there is no better representation of the Kargyu lineage and Dharma altogether than Thrangu Rinpoche. And we cannot receive that unbroken blessing from any greater being than Thrangu Rinpoche. So we thank you for returning, Rinpoche, and we hope that you return again and again and again. And please give us the precious Dharma. Thank you.
Tene tatanda tangbo jerdo chenamba kanga tambichu chukola hyup tene tambichu ge nyamne na tene tambichu la tepa phosong sobachi tene nawala tambo ngarang tujiche hyoyin la tene tanda mixalto chenamba tanda 다 사다림보네 까와지네 담배 주게 제들은 나페 되네 당아랑게 춘튼 히에바데라 제 당화다 조안다 보지 나네 페발라 투지 지휴주다 대나랑게 자 주히에베 값슬라 제르도 나랑라 미살게 토모마임베 투지 신나다 냥동 또바카야 요 마레데 이나야 나랑게 주휴바데 당마 드네 지브 체버진 당지게 송하다 드네 상지지 까단 토바 라보제 당나랑게 휴콜 세두 데라 나랑게 주휴바데게 제란 넘발라야 단도 매반다보다 펜토 매반다보지 마임바 문이 나랑게 펜토그레 테네 다디 추텔라 테네 야보제 용그레 선베게 레와다 지비 테체나바 강가라 투지지 휴이.
First of all, I would like to thank all of you for, in general, your having entered the gate of Dharma, your practice of Dharma, and your great and excellent faith in it. Especially, I want to thank all of you for the undoubted enthusiasm which has caused you to, at the expense of great difficulty, and in the case of many of you traveling a great distance, has caused all of you to come here to listen to what I have to say. About teaching, while I don't feel that I have any special experience or realization or qualities or blessings, nevertheless, I am confident that what I will be teaching you is beneficial, because I am merely repeating the words and the teachings of holy beings who have preceded me, and their teachings as well were solidly founded on the teachings of the Buddha himself. So I am confident and hopeful that far from being meaningless, this will be beneficial to you.
Tene tatanda dogung kapsula jerdo chambata ninjeta janchuk semta tene tanda legendary ko ne de hyonanda sambatende chongson la tene teya tangbo ta jerdo ta chambata ninje senkinte ta janchuk sem senkinte zo ta tanda jerdo rangin senjin kangala pembe kulon chebarjin rela tini decherna tanda ngaranso nangba sanjiba zammayiba chulu chembokande ji yinaya ta chamba gugre ninje gugre janju sem gugre senkeje mato tin tenzo je guba mepanda botan pe mepanda botende suyaja sungyo mare la te mixal ke hyogoya mepanda botire te yinaya tanda mixal ke hyoya te ta namba sanjibe tumo mayimbe chechu go ne ta chechu to mo mai ba kare yo re se na de misal to ngun zai ne ju ji je ta de ne de ya ji dang ga on de se na dan da de ne ta kun zo chong chu ku san rinpoche se ju de ji dang ga namba sang ji be da wa la de ne da me ba da chue tang ji dong ni yin ba la zo nang ge yo re de yin na ya de ne ta dan da to mo mai ba tene dancing lam to chip dang ta wa ji yin bicherna tene chamba ta ni je gam ba ka sala tene da ye ba yin ye ba tene te ta ba je ke go ne gam ba ke dang wa da wa je la tene ko ge yo re.
I thought that tonight I would speak to you about love, compassion, and bodhicitta, and also about causality or karma. First of all, I should mention, as is well known, that love, compassion, and even bodhicitta, which principally refer to the altruistic wish to benefit all beings, are not in and of themselves uniquely Buddhist. All great religions teach that we need to develop love and compassion for others. There is no major religion that teaches that these things are useless or harmful. What I want to isolate and make clear to you, however, is the specific Buddhist approach to the development of these, and especially that which is concerned with what we call the relative bodhicitta. As is well known, the principal emphasis in Buddha Dharma is the presentation and realization of selflessness or emptiness. But on the path, we have to find a way of harnessing the very fixation on the self that we wish to vanquish. So therefore, on the path, our basis for cultivating bodhicitta is our perception of the existence of self and others.
Tene ta te yang tanda jitang chamba se na dewa tang dende tang te yendo nije se na senjing ke tungha tang chande tene ta chanchu ke san rinpoche se na tene te yang tene dewa te tendo dewa thopa che tang dunghal te yang tendo chalwa che gupa yinpe cherna tene tartuk tenji dewa zopu sonji jomden teji gompong toparande pa tela janchuk ke sem sege yore.
To define these, love in a Buddhist context refers to the desire that others possess happiness, and compassion to the corresponding desire that others be free of suffering. Bodhicitta refers specifically to the desire that others possess a permanent and perfect happiness and permanent and perfect freedom from suffering. Since this can only be achieved through their achievement of perfect awakening, therefore, bodhicitta is the desire that all beings attain just that.
Tene ta te yang ta tanda jitang namba sangji pala tomo ma yinpe cheshu kari yore se na tene te la jamba tse me ta ninje tse me ta sungi yore la tene te yang tse me pa singi te jitang on te se na te se ja chenpo yinpa tabu jira kogi yore te yina yang te tabu ja chenpo ma yinpa tene ta te la kandi kogi yore se na tene tse me pa ta ngaranso jitang on te se na tene senjin tamji la sanji ki nimbo yeba yinpa cherna tamji la tene niji yore jamba yore re te yina yin te la jen kari yungi yore se na tene ta tige jen te tanda tene jen te kari yungi yore se na tene ta te la tene tse na buji te zi yo ne shu che la jamba yeba Choche la nije yeba, yang choche la chamba meba, choche la nije meba, Rinpoche tene deta ge che yaban Rinpoche yore la, tene che de ye na, tene rang choda, yenje cho, chamba yebe ge choda. Chamba mebe ge choda, nije yebe ge choda, nije mebe ge choda Rinpoche she ne kahi la nije yeba. Tene kahi la tezong ge nije meba, tene tela je chodong ge namba Rinpoche unju ge nyenka yore la. Tene junsin teacher na, tene namba sanji be tomo mayimbe chamba ta nije kante goge yore se na tse meba. Tamchi jikpa na hinte la. Tene su je la chamba ta nije yeba ta, su je la chamba ta nije meba mayimba. Tamchi la jikpa na hinte ye goba te pe kalchewa yore.
The uncommon feature of the Buddhist approach to love and compassion is that these are cultivated impartially. Now, we normally call this the cultivation of immeasurable love and immeasurable compassion. But when you use this word, immeasurable conveys an image of something that is incredibly vast. Here we're talking about more than the mere scope of it. We're talking about the actual quality of the love and the quality of the compassion. Since all beings possess Buddha nature, all beings naturally have some degree of love and compassion. The problem, however, is that we always place limits on our love and limits on our compassion through partiality. That is to say, we love some beings, but not others. We feel compassion for some beings, but not others. We divide beings into two groups, those for whom we feel love and compassion and those for whom we do not. Therefore, our love and compassion really become a condition for attachment and aversion. The Buddhist approach is to cultivate a love and compassion that are free from this type of attachment and aversion, that are immeasurable and unlimited in the true sense of being utterly impartial, equally focused on or directed to all beings.
Tene ta teacher na cerdo tseme namba ye gamba kapsala tangbo jamba tseme nipa nije tseme sumba gawa tseme yewa tonyo tseme rete hinaya ta ngarazo kepa tong tutso tongchi ke mengo la tena tangbo jamba tseme gamba mayimba tangbo tonyo tseme gamba re songyo re la tene tige tombo tonyo tseme de gamba be junsen de kande jire se na soje la hajang ke jamba tan nije jawanda bo yo mayimba soje la jamba tan nije hajang me pata bo yo mayimba kanga nyamba ta bo je gamba be yim bicherna tonyo de rang ke jamba tan nije yep chola ya mixal ke jamba tan nije ma gamba je rang ke jamba tan nije meba mebe ke chota jamba tan nije mebe masiba hedang ta thado la so ba yebe ke chota bo je yena tela hedang ta thado la so ba seba mayimba tela ya tonhyam de kanga tonhyam ke nambala gam ne tini nerin chodong me ba ji chauna le tang bo pala te kal chewa yin be cherna tang bo tonhyam se me gam ko gre tini song.
Generally speaking, when we list the four immeasurables, the order is love, compassion, empathetic joy, and impartiality. But according to the instructions which have been left to us by all of the scholars and siddhas of the past, in the sequence of their practice, we don't practice them in that order. We begin with the cultivation of impartiality itself, which in the usual sequence is presented as the fourth. The reason why impartiality must be cultivated before you begin to cultivate love, compassion, and empathetic joy is that without doing so, if you start with the cultivation of love, you may cultivate a strong love and strong compassion for some and none whatsoever for others. By cultivating impartiality in the beginning, you avoid the possible error of focusing your love and compassion only on those you already love, and allowing your neutrality towards some, or even worse, your hatred toward others, to remain undiminished. By cultivating impartiality in the beginning, you cultivate an equal amount of love and compassion for all.
Tene ta tele tene te tabu ge nyering mepa tabu jeta chodong mepa tabu je jona tene te tene chambata nije compare to tangu yore la chambata nije compare to tangu kapsala jitang chambat dewatan tende ge chamba sinkite ta dungal ton tande ge nije sinkite be ta chimpo cheparchi rete yinaya Tela mengo mena tezi tab dubu ndabuji yore. Tab dubu kande yungare se na perna ta semchi jay dungal nyung na tini te niji jing tege tong ne tini te niji jing te yang pe semba jo nying je jege yore la. Tini nying je na ya te dungal le jabe ke tab ndabuji nyege yore mare la. Teacher na tini senjin teyo donghal, niji jengin teyo donghal, nika jobo tang dubu nabuji rene, te deba te la, chome ba nabuji yore la. Tini teacher na chamba tang niji gamba kasa la, tini ke tab dubu ma yinpa, te gogi yore. Tini ke tab dubu ma yinpa, ti tabhi kari nang gogi yore se na, tini ta te la, senjin tamji dewa tang, Devi Jodan temperature che so jeta semchi thamchi dungal ta dungal chi Jodan tower churche so anse parela tini cherdo devata dengu bacheta dungal ta tal gu bache rete hinaya tige zawate kare gugre sena tambo devata tembala devi jote gugi ore dungal ta tower che pala dungal Jodan tower che talwache gugi ore la teni tige devata den devi jodan tembata dungal ji jodan talwa te kapkala khashila teni ngone chera dungal gi joti dipa megewa leda nyemo bandata baji re ndapangu re ndada talna dungal ta talge re sin ngote seji ya bacheta dewa topi gi jote ta neka sonam ji tsudu yi hi ji tsu sa na teni tela dewa topi re se ne teni dewa topi gi tapte yore la te yeba la teni te dewa topi gi jote ten togi ya bacheta dungal ta talge gi jote ten to baji yin bicherna teni te chambatan hinje te tab mebanda boji ma yinpa chambatan hinje te tab dong tenpa je yungi yore.
So first of all, we have to cultivate an impartiality that is free of attachment towards some and aversion toward others. Once that has been cultivated, then we engage in the actual strengthening or increasing of love and compassion. Now, love, the aspiration that beings possess happiness, and compassion, the aspiration that beings be free of suffering, are valuable, obviously, in and of themselves. But if you cultivate them without precise instructions, sometimes they become causes of frustration and suffering. If someone cultivates a love that wants to see all beings happy, and a compassion that wants to see all beings free of suffering, and then they witness the suffering of someone and are unable to do anything about it, they become sad and frustrated. Because they can't prevent that being suffering, in the end, what happens is that two people are suffering. The sufferer is suffering, and the compassionate person is suffering as well, which seems somewhat useless. So it's important to prevent love and compassion from becoming a condition for further suffering. How do we do this? We do it by phrasing our aspiration, structuring our love and compassion in a special way. We aspire not only that beings possess happiness, but that they possess the causes of happiness. We aspire not only that beings be free of suffering, but that they be free of causes of suffering. Now, the point of these aspirations is the same as the simple aspiration, may all beings be happy, may all beings be free of suffering. But included within it is the recognition that beings can only achieve happiness by amassing its causes, and can only become free of suffering by eradicating its causes. This also prevents you from feeling powerless when through compassion. For example, there are situations where you cannot immediately remove someone's suffering, but you can say to them, your suffering is caused by karma and kleshas. If you want to stop suffering, abandon them. And there are situations where, while you cannot immediately give someone the happiness they want, you can say to them, the cause of happiness is the gathering of the accumulations of merit and wisdom. If you want to be happy, gather them. In short, by having the aspiration that beings possess not only happiness and freedom from suffering, but the causes of these, your compassion becomes freed from helplessness.
Tene ta te tabu ke devi jola ke pata dungal ke jodan trawar se pata bu ji yina ta khahi kalwa ta demba yung yore khahi kalwa te chom tom demba yung yore la kalwa ta demba non le yina ta cherang ke devi jo te gewi ke sa wan da ta bu ji se ne sanam ji chu do yi ji chu sa na dewa thok re sin ten na te nyams len to ba je yore la te yen do dung ji jo don taru ki cher to tene le da nyam ba ten zo pang na tene dung da tar ki re sin ten to ba je yore la te kal ba da dem ba re te ta bu ji yin na te la te ne dung da tawa da dewa da to ba si to gi yore khai te ta bu kal ba da me den ba yung gi yore te la ngu ne ge ge sawa drupa la te chom ge tro me ba tene te yen do dipa me ge wa yin na ponde ge lo me ba tene khai tundu ge ren da bo ji yin na ngu su tene te ge ngu su te ko mi hi ba nyam slim mi hi ba tene len hi mon be ge namba tan te ba ta tene yore la yore te yin ya tenzo la rang chamba dan hiji yapa la tene tene nekap tga rang la pen to ba je ma jung na ya ma hon ba la remji dung ta tawa ta dewa to pe ta te she ji yo re te dang ge control bu chi ge song na tene tongdol se na tene sanji ge kon da bo ta jang ju sem ba chim bu ge kon da bo ta tene ming long lan tong zong se na ya te 카드 la dunghata trawata tene tingen se jilla chewata yente cheparchi jilla chewa yungre besina yungyo mare te yinaya tene making thonga la tene tela tene chilap ke nupa da bojeta pacha je rang sen la tene semji tene yungyo la tene ti pacha ton saben chunchun ti remji pelne mahompa la rimje tene ta tanda tarbi saben jela tepa yin bechena mahompa la rimji tarba to tawji je kompon tawji ye ba je yung re so je ta tene te yendo la tudul sena ta tambi chu ngusu kodan tepa je perna tundu re da bo je ge na tu to ge yo re besina tu to ge yo mare ko hi ge yo mare te yina yung zungha da bo je nalam do tu na tene dige 카드라 tene topa jila jewan rabu yungi yo mare te yina ya ti drati namam do thupa la tene sem ge ten to pacha zangbo je yungi yo re la pacha thabo je yungi yo re pacha thabo te tu namyong cholan do ge yo mare la pacha thabo te yinji minji gal chebo ya ba yin be cherna tene chitang ge Sanji ku minam tonganda boda zunga nalam navelam to tupanda boji na tela tenia dunghata mahopala rimji dunghata trawata devato bi jorun rogi warela tini junsin teacher na tini simchin tomji devata devi jodan tembarchoji dunghal jodon tawar choji somni tendesine tat nalam tapaina yandra ngaransu semche paina yandra lalin sheba ina yandra deta na be bento chima yong.
However, in the matter of establishing beings and causes of happiness and removing from them causes of suffering, there is a great deal of difference in the receptivity of beings. Some beings are receptive to this type of message, and some beings are not. There are some beings to whom you can simply say, if you want to be happy, perform such and such act of virtue, and you will bring about your own happiness. And then you simply show them how to do it, and they become happy. Those beings are receptive. In the same way, there are some beings to whom you can say, well, the cause of your suffering is wrongdoing, and so forth, so simply stop, and the suffering will cease. But there are beings to whom you simply can't say this, because they're not receptive. There are beings who, regardless of their desire, in spite of their desire for happiness, have no interest in engaging in virtue. And there are beings who, in spite of their desire to be free from suffering, have no interest in abstention from wrongdoing. And then there are beings who simply can't understand, like, for example, animals, with whom you cannot communicate in this way. But even in these situations, when you can't simply tell the being something that is going to make an immediate change, you still have ways or means in your disposal to establish in them causes of happiness and remove from them causes of suffering. As was taught by Jonggon Lodru Tai, principally this involves placing in their perception conditions for their future liberation, such as liberation through seeing and liberation through hearing. Now, liberation through seeing means exposing beings to such things as images of Buddhas and so forth. Now, it is not the case that simply by seeing an image of a Buddha, a being is immediately going to develop profound samadhi or extraordinary realization or immediately become free from suffering. What will, however, happen is that the blessing of that image will cause a small but very long-lasting virtuous habit, something like a seed, to enter their being. And eventually, over time, this will grow, and it will definitely bring about their future liberation and achievement of omniscient awakening. The same thing with liberation through hearing. If a being, such as an animal who cannot understand Dharma, hears the sound of various mantras, this is not going to cause them to develop profound realization on the spot, but it will establish within them a slight habit that they will never lose. And over time, this will cause their liberation. So even in such ways, through showing beings images of Buddhas or through reciting mantras in their hearing, you can indirectly cause their future happiness and freedom from suffering. So this is why in our aspiration, we aspire, may all beings possess happiness and causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and causes of suffering. This is the way we phrase it as an aspiration. This is the attitude that we attempt to cultivate, and this is how we actually practice these things in dealing with others.
Tene ta telaya ta cherto teta buche devata devi jodan tempe ke tapta dunga de jodan tawe ke tap siena tene khashela pe sana pocha sang bu yaba yang khashi kapkala sana lota jewanda yedan jewanda boyo kapka yung sigre yung sigre te yinaya tige pocha te semla yane rimji jezandon rogi warela te ya jasi hiwa lag samna tene tanda kanla nepa se chung denderwa devin june te la japsun chi song warela jangshu semba chimbu je ta losam number tapa je chongju kusen tuji la hiu ya ba je la chepa pol tene sonam ju tso so chu hyo tende sena pe pento chimbo yung yore la te mayin pa michi ge hedang go ne nepa chi sena ya tene neka te chanchu semba tel nepa seba la tene leng ba sa ba yung re leng ba sa ba la tene debu ngem ba yung sig yung yore te inaya tartu janchu ke semta tene losam number tapa yepe ke topji nepa sepa telan tartu tene dungal te nyong ge yola tartu ko on de sena dewaji thogi ore sung re la devin june teacher na devin june te la chapsu chi sung re la tene te ta bo yang kap ka la lotan ra bo ta hedan ra bo che na ya tene ta ti phenne tsani me phemba mepa nepa khona imba ra bo ma imba tartu ko on de sena tene te la ya phemba yung ge ore tene sung.
With regard to such methods of benefiting beings, of establishing causes of happiness and removing causes of suffering for them, beings can react in different ways to these as well. Some beings immediately become somewhat inspired by these things. Other beings become angry or antipathetic. It's important to recognize, however, that the benefit of exposure to these things is still there, regardless of beings' reaction. Shantideva wrote, "I pay homage to those bodhisattvas who equally benefit those who venerate them and those who seek to harm them." What he's referring to is the fact that contact with a bodhisattva is always beneficial. If someone approaches a bodhisattva with faith and venerates them, the benefit, of course, is obvious. But even if someone approaches them with antipathy or even hatred, by seeking to harm that bodhisattva, they will, of course, accumulate negative karma and suffer. But finally, because they've made a connection with that bodhisattva, even though it was initially a negative one, they will become happy through the blessing of that bodhisattva and the influence of it. So even if beings react negatively to exposure to these things, you should not think that they fail to be benefited by them.
Tene ta te tabo ta chitang dewa tang tende ke chamba tang dungal tang tande ke ninje te a be kal chimpo ire la tene te la ya chitang susu ke samba zambu ke on de sena dewa tang tende yepa zomya chitang ke yapore dungal tang tande yepa te yapore te yina din dang re sena ti te sin dang mare la dewa tang tende yepa te dewa la ke kasi tutu je tene dunga tsani me be dewala ke pa dunga teni me ba je separ nde be kono te be kalche ge yore la teacher na tartu janju ke san Rinpoche te be kalche ge yore janju ke san Rinpoche te ta kande je re se na tartu semjin thamji tene semjin ga on de se na semjin thamji tene ten tartu ge revu on de se na job sun ji jam den de kompon la que par ndebe lo tawaje ji tupna ta tela be chanchu ku san Rinpoche be charna tini te chita ranguni yena sonom ge chu ja chimbo chu ya samba ja chimbo tini senchi somji me chapala tini samba zangbo chepar tam pa tam temba yin be charna rang so so la ya be sonom ji chu ja chimbo tam tembe kunzo chanchu ku san Rinpoche jela jewa rela tini tege kunzo sonchu ke sen te jila jipa la tene tanda senjin la pen langsung ta thubri se na kapkal ta thuba yung gre la khahi ke ta thuba yung yore khahi te sam senjin la pen ta ma thuba yung yore te ina ya ti kohon te pe ja chim botan Jane Rinpoche Yimbicherna, Chesing Koroan Tap Matonga Bardo la Tikung de Nomio Zoya Mapate Yimbicherna, Kuhon Zangbote, Zoya Mapate Yimbicherna, the Senjin la Kadu Yinaya, Kadu paint out to be to capture Naya, tick up the Nala, paint out to buy Yimbicherna, Tinity Ranling and Pento Dachim Bunjubi Orella, Yena Tezong Pento Dachim Bunjubi.
In that way, love, the aspiration that beings possess happiness and its causes, and compassion, the aspiration or wish that they be free from suffering and its causes, are extremely important. But if you ask, is that enough? The answer is no. We need even more than that. Because our aspiration for beings must not merely be the aspiration for their temporary or partial happiness. It needs to be an aspiration for their achievement of perfect and permanent happiness. And our aspiration for their freedom from suffering must be more than the aspiration that they be free from a specific temporary suffering. It must become the aspiration that they be permanently free from all suffering whatsoever. So therefore, finally, love and compassion must mature into bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is essentially the wish and intention to establish each and every being in the state of perfect Buddhahood. And the motivation for this is your understanding that it is only through achieving perfect Buddhahood that beings will achieve a state of perfect and permanent happiness and perfect and permanent freedom from suffering. Simply generating this aspiration of bodhicitta is a source of great benefit for the person who generates it. By generating it, by cultivating it, you accumulate tremendous merit because you're cultivating an attitude of open-ended and all-encompassing and completely altruistic benevolence. You are aspiring for the ultimate benefit to all beings without exception. But it is not only beneficial to the person who generates it, it is of just as much benefit to all others as well. Once someone generates bodhicitta, while it is not the case that they become immediately able to help all others, they are sometimes able to help others and sometimes not able to help them effectively in the short run. Nevertheless, for as long as samsara has not been emptied, their aspiration to bring about the liberation and awakening of all beings will not be lost, because that aspiration will not yet have been fulfilled. Therefore, they will continue to benefit beings as much as they can, and their ability to do so will grow over time, for as long as samsara lasts. Therefore, that person's generation of bodhicitta is a source of tremendous benefit for others as well.
Tene tateya janjuk sem jilla chip capsula pe jachembota tene zijitan tempa che yorvisina yo mare te yinaya te la pe rangin ganga la pembege pento samji ma chapa jachembun jumli yore te amperna ta daja ka tempa zopu sonji jamdinde shachatu ta je yina Tene ta konga ta number 2% maji ke bahar tulaya tene chonju sembe kepa ki ne senji samji me jabate la pemba ta dewala ke kalba mambola pemba ta dewala ke yorela zobu sonji jamden de number 2% je ne ya tene per na ngaranso ngusun to tanda patla sono tana sanji jamden de ji tambe chu chu ko korne thala tu ke patla Tene ta chonchu semba chimbo kasi ji chanyaba. Tene tegendo nyentu ga long la kyupa ta chamba chimbo kasi ji chantu yaba. Tegendo songha doji tipe long la kyuk ne tene tambe chunyan solomba la tene tutok chimbo kasi ji chanyaba te. Ta tanda ngaranso ga te songho chitana samji ma chapanda bochire. Samji ma chapanda bochire ta tege nyentu ji tipe indulu ge loma samji ma chapa. Janju sembe tibin doruge loma samji ma japa songha doji tibe lonen doruge loma samji ma japa tende jan yore tenzo be mesibe pento jachimbo chungyo. Te Riria Konza Rang Susu Tamba Maimpa, Riria Senji Samji Machapal, Pento Jachimbo Nayora. The Pento Jachimbo now Nupa de Kanichumari Sena, Tambo Zobsunji jumped in the Chumari. Zobsunji jumped in the Data Tambichu Song Tupata, Tambichu Tain Tupik, Nupandavote, Kandiji Sene, Tambo Chumari Sena, Tini Tambo Janju Sembat. Jaune, Janju Samba, Susujio Tamalbaji Saune, Susujio Tamalbati, Jonju the same Japanese on the Rimji, Jumachi Rela, Tiniteo, Dodi Kalvazambugan to Sona, Dajaga Demba Zopus jumped in the Sonju the two countries Japarisena, none Nancy Ulvurjubana, Tinicon, come on, Kablatini, Tomzi Ulvo, he the Jawaini. Tene ulvo hindu ulvo jele jewa hin. Tene ta sanji jamdin de je kong jali yung kapsula. Tene teba yabu je jene. Ta di kap tana la korang ke je pulgu gundo samba yore. Samba yore te yina ya ta pulia je la korang ke long de peke tuba pava khan yore la. Tene te sanji jamdin de la pul. Tene sanji jamdin de je jang. Pe Tangwa Chimpu go ne ya ye nang to tell. Then the Tomsi over tell pe, Tepa Yapoche, Tepa Tomoma Impaji to Dilla, Tony. Then the Yinki by Cheko Chenrata, Cordon Kushi on Hinhansu, Chijin Senju Zumbo Chendawa, Tenda Kona Dodge on your hills on the Melamja. That's Sanji Chetnang Hing go, Sanji Chetnang Hing Kor, Sanji Chetnang Hing Chu. That Tindeje, Mahombala, Yontabar Hills, Goni, Melon Dane, that Jonju to Tokyo. Jonju to the Tokyo, but the Captain Alacon, Transi Ulvo, Tupapa Comato, Pujumeba, Tap Jobaji, Yorete, Yinaya, teach Jonju to the Tokyo, but the pay top Chiboya Palatene, Tene Randango on the Sina Zopus jumped in the Compong and the sit Tabaje. Down Yendango on the Sina, sinking some Jimachapa. Trangi Malomba Tetavel Pento Jachim Jung to Nubati, Tambo Sonju the Sanji Pachunchu, Delatini, Yungi or Rella, the Junsin teacher Nangaransoya, the Tanda Sonju the Sanji Pati, Inji, Minji, Samba Zamboto the Bati in the Karchi.
When a person first generates bodhicitta, is it going to be majestic or impressive? Probably not. But nevertheless, in spite of the fact that our initial generation of bodhicitta may not seem that impressive or majestic to us, we need to remember that it is the true origin and true beginning of immeasurable benefit for ourselves and others. If we consider our teacher, Buddha Shakyamuni, and what he has achieved, from the period, going back to the period before he achieved Buddhahood, for aeon after aeon, he engaged in the deeds of a bodhisattva, benefiting beings tremendously. And then, having achieved Buddhahood, through his teaching of Dharma, how many beings has he established in the state of bodhisattvas through the practice of Mahayana? How many beings have achieved the state of an arhat through the practice of the Shravakayana? How many beings have achieved the state of a Mahasiddha through the practice of Vajrayana? We would have to say that there are innumerable examples of each of these. And each of these individuals who, because of Buddha Shakyamuni's teaching, has achieved these states of liberation, has in turn benefited innumerable others. And all of this benefit for so many beings came from the Buddha. Now, what gave Buddha Shakyamuni the ability to teach? Where did his ability to teach come from? It came from his first generation of bodhicitta when he was an ordinary person. According to the Bhadrakalpa Sutra, when asked when he had first generated bodhicitta, the Buddha answered, "When I was very poor." And starting with those words, he told the story of a previous life long ago in which he had been born as an extremely poor Brahmin beggar, who on his begging rounds one day encountered a Buddha, who impressed him so much that he thought, I really should offer something to this Buddha. But he had nothing to offer except for a small bowl of soup that he had received as alms while begging. He offered this to the Buddha, who accepted it and drank it. And while the Buddha was drinking the soup that the Brahmin offered him, the Brahmin made the aspiration, may I come to achieve a state exactly like yours. May I come to have a name like yours, a body like yours, teach Dharma like your Dharma, and have a retinue equal to yours. Now, at the time that he made that aspiration, that being who went on to become Buddha Shakyamuni was nothing more than a poor beggar. But the power of his aspiration was the cause of his achievement of awakening as Buddha Shakyamuni, and of all the benefit that he has brought about for others. So we definitely need to cultivate and respect this type of aspiration.
Tene ta teta bu shongchu chu de sen che pa de pe kalchi krela. Shongchu chu de sen che pa de kalchi wa te ya ta chitang ko on de se na chu ma mai ba rang yin ge ngune ge tene jing takwa ne janchu ge san ro che de je la che go ge yo re te yin ya ta ngara so kashi che to pa yong yong ge yo je la kashi la so su ji wo tamal ba song du ta ju ma ma yin ba tin de je ma to pa yong ge yo re te yin ya ju ma ma yin ba je ma to na ya ju ma ge go ne ta ngara chung chu chu to sen ji go ge re ngara chang chu chu to sen je pa yin som ba te tini ka ju yin ya sal ta ka ju yin ya san la ten tini che ju te pe kal che bo re la tini ta te ya jitang ge ju ma re te yin ya ju ma te la te ne ta rim ji kam te ju ma yin pa un ji bi cher na ngara so ngo do ji te pe nyam ne na ka sa la choga kandri ji yin ya ye pa yin na yin da du pa yin na yin da te la ta sun ro to song chu chu de sen ji pa me ba ji yung ge yo ma re la teacher na tini te song chu chu de sem ji pa de pe kal che ge yo re la tini te yung song chu chu de sen ji pa de je ya ge cher to la ta ngara chu kandri nyam ne nang ge yo re se na lo jong ge mi pa nang ge yo re la lo jong ge na ne ta je dan da tini de du tong ling ge mi pa sin tene ta ngarang gandando senchi mangbo ye pagam ngarang upar ta kapsala tene rang teji ta yen den ta tene gewa la so batam chi senchi ten zola tang tene utsorngo kapsala senchi ten ju ge dungal ta dedib la so batam chi chordo ta tene sene tene tanda ngarang so lojong germe nga no ne ya tongling ni po permargam tini longa gente sa se ta ula dro ni gong gu kre song yo re la te ta gong nang tup na pe pen to chi mo ke ro yong.
In that way, the cultivation of bodhicitta and its initial generation are important. Now, ideally, of course, we want our bodhicitta to be unfabricated, to be sincere and heartfelt and intense. But sometimes we can't begin that way. Even though our initial formulation of bodhicitta may seem somewhat artificial, somewhat forced, it is still worthwhile. Because in your artificial or forced formulation of bodhicitta, basically a wish to generate bodhicitta, the thought, I want to generate bodhicitta, okay, I am generating bodhicitta, even though that is forced and is fabricated, if you reinforce it, it will eventually lead to a sincere and unfabricated, heartfelt bodhicitta. This is of great importance, as is evident in the fact that all Vajrayana practices begin with the formal renewal of the vow of refuge, and generation of bodhicitta. Now, the best way to cultivate and strengthen bodhicitta is through the practice of Mahayana mind training. And most important within that is the taking and sending of happiness and suffering. To practice this, you consider that the many sentient beings are present before you, and as you breathe out, you think that you give to them all of your happiness and all causes of happiness, and that they receive and all of these things. And as you breathe in, you think that you take from them and collect into yourself all of their suffering and all of its causes. We practice this in the coordination with the breathing, as is taught in the root text of the 7 points of mind training, which says, practice taking and sending in alteration, coordinated with the breathing.
Tene ta tetago gomne tene jerdo chambakam nijegam tene janju ksem gam ne ta rang semte tanda remji zangbola juryak tap tene nang ko yorela tene tela tene rev khandi yung yore sena tene tel tene gawatsi me pasung yore gawatsi me pasung tela tene tache range tene samni ji chongchu ksem gam ne pe tela gam la ji chimbo ji tan tene je rev zangbo ji chongna pe gawa yung rela te tabu majung na ya ta ngarang ge te sa ji gom ne te chong ge nyam ne chi ma tu na ya ta ngarang ge ngun ne chi che pa yin rim ji phel ge re som ba ta bu je ge sa la ga wa da to wa je or jo wa yin pi na te te ga wa chi me pa so yin sa re.
Through training your mind in love and compassion and bodhicitta, through cultivating these, over time your mind changes. You become more and more benevolent. The result of this is the achievement of the other of the 4 immeasurables, immeasurable joy. And immeasurable joy is the resultant feeling of delight and satisfaction. Delight in the results of your cultivation, in the changes that occur within you, and at the very least, satisfaction in the knowledge that you are cultivating something that is virtuous and beneficial.
Tene ta tige chongni ji chongchu ksen kor te sa ji huba yin la tene te ji sa la ngarang ge le jun de ge kor te sa ji hyuna sambata chong song la tene le jun de sen ke te cherdo ta ngaran so ga ngo so tong ge yo mari sang ji chom den de ji chong song na tene te la tene chitang ngu po kangal ngen jurta tene ko jurta hindu ko jurna basam yore sam yore la tene ta tanda khahi ngarang su ngu sun thonga te ngen jur imba che ta ten khahi diba ga sam ta ne hi go ba ten zo ko jur tene te yendo hindu ko jur se na le jun de ge jewa de jewa nga se le jun de kan de se yung yore se na hindu ko jur ndo ba ta ngarang so 통기 요래라 드니 티처나 다테라 드니 이치지 까온다 보지 요래 때 있나요 다테 림지 라 야포 송땅나 드니 때 응니 레전드라 때니 용래 somebata boje yung thugi yore teni teya kandi jire se na penna ngarang misela somoji ta ngarang somoji ni tani ngarang misete kandi ji chongdo somo tani pe yo na teni ngarang misete la teni jitang ngarang kana ji pare se na pel ji pare teni ta pel ji gu bi junsin te ngarang gi pel ji gu du somni ji pare se na mare ya me yendo je ga on ye tani ngarang pel ji ju are se na mare kora rahi ke ngarang teni pel ji are ji gu bi junsin te kare se na ta te Jiawangam Lela Dini Chungajiri Matuhi, Tela Junsin to Gupandabokaya here. La Teni Tea Pella Chipika Kapla Kanditila Jehorisena Yana Telling Nasajil Jehona Narantia telling Nasajil Jehona Copella Chipo in the death of a Jingio Yana Telatine Pella Chisaji Jehona Yan Tea Devo and the Jingio Yina Kangal Chew Captain Langara Jiarela. The Kangal Chew Captain of the Chia could be Johnson Carilla. Sena, tell Johnson Kaya Yore, Naratiangam, Lelatinity, Chore Mato, Tela, Johnson Kaya, oh, Tati, the Tiangam, Layings and Duga, some Pandafote. Tendesine, Giorella. Teta of J. Sedutella, Takora, Leran Remato, Ye, Tene. Junsin the Bokai Yomar. Ta tela Narangal Lubola, so much Tankana, Nara Mesa Yomar. She makes a woman with Junsin Carilisin, or Tati Yonga lay into the bar. Nara make myself with Junsin Kaya Yomar. Tene, Tatiavo, some of Rimbi Tanga, Tenzo Kanga, Sosu Susu Somotana, or Narantia Ham Lelt in the Chwings at the Vars only, in Hitietavan, which you are reason.
That was a brief explanation of love, compassion, and bodhicitta. Next, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I also thought I would talk a little bit about karma. Now, karma, actions and their results, this is something that we cannot see. According to the Buddha, there are three types of phenomena. There are manifest phenomena, there are hidden phenomena, and there are well-hidden phenomena. Manifest phenomena are those things that we can perceive with direct valid cognition. Hidden phenomena are those that we cannot perceive directly, but those that we can infer through inferential valid cognition. And then there are well-hidden phenomena, which are very, very hard even to infer. In this category of things are such things as the existence of previous and future lives and the stream of results of actions or karma that cause these past and future lives to occur as they do. And these things are well hidden from us. Nevertheless, I believe that you can, through personal examination and analysis, develop a conviction about this. And the best way to do this is to consider your life. If I use myself as an example, and I look at my life, the first thing I would say about my life is that I was born in Tibet. Now, why was I born in Tibet? Was I born in Tibet because I wanted to be? No. Was I born in Tibet because someone sent me there? No. I just was. The only possible reason for me to have been born in Tibet is that it was a result of my own previous actions or karma. Now, with regard to my being born in Tibet, we also have to think about exactly when I was born. If I had been born in Tibet a little bit earlier, in a previous period, things would have been pretty much okay. Or if I had been born about 30 years later, things would have been more or less okay. Why did I have to get born during the most turbulent and difficult period of Tibetan history? Why? There's no reason other than it was my own previous actions. Okay, that's about my birth. Now let's consider my body. One thing about my body is I don't have very good eyesight. I've never had good eyesight. And sometimes I think, why don't I have good eyesight? Well, there's no reason for my not having good eyesight other than it being a result of my own previous actions. So if in this way you carefully consider the characteristics of your own present existence, you can gain conviction in the results of actions.
Tene ta teacher na ta rang so ge meseta rang so ge lu la te na ta che kyang nam lel te ni chong ma che ta te ya le zang bo ta ngem ba sing ki te tene ta chitang kal chyo in picture na sanji jam din te chin do in no song na tene penji ta zoji ge le no ba ni song yo re la tene tangbom penji ge le ta bu je yin na tene ta che lutin sangbo la ji ji ge le ta lutin ngem ba la ji ji ge le ya song yo re tene te la ya lutin sangbo la che na ya khashi kap ka la parchi mangboji jingemba mangboji tende yorela tene teacher na zoji gles ta tela meseti zoji gel meseti na inda sosu gchede zoji gele lete ya kashi yapola tene zonro kashi dubola tene zonro ta tende yorela tene kashi tende sundu tela penji gewe mpongla zoji megewe zoba tene penji gewe mpongla pensi migewe mpongla zoji gewe zokwa tene pensi gewe mpongla zoji ya gewe zokwa pensi migewe mpongla zoji ya migewe zokwa ta tende ndamanda yo song yo wa la tin ngaran so kale rang la ya ta yin la ya ta tin ngone yimba da doga sambate yong thu yo wa la tin teacher na ngaran so le jun di so ya te pe kal chimbo ti junsen kare re se na hamar chese 다디 류라뚜지 치마르 진줄 다디 레라뚜지 당마 되네 두토침보 된적 성요래라 제왕 하마라 나랑 그 가래 제워서도 간데지 하고 그래서나 단다그 류텔라 때나 오 나랑 야나 개와시 요사래 단다 오지 야부도 야나게 미개와시 요사래 당한 단다 추추지 마도 문도 서봐 하고도 그래서 다 치마르 진줄 다 마음 발라 가렌도 그래서나 대야 치마르 진줄 다디 레라뚜 다 단다 마음 발랑가 야부 무사리 말이 야 근데 단다 레카디 야부지 제긴도 류게 야부지 마게 야부지 샘게 야부지 제긴도나 오 당가 마음 발로 오지 무사리 성선데 단당이 야부자 제긴만도와 나랑 류게 레카고 야부랑 제긴만도 샘게 성노 야부자 당그만도 되네 ngog고네야 배 야보지 세게만도 와 통나 어 당가라 마음발라 최세지마도 온사만도 선바하고도 그래서 티처나 티 단다 칸치 그바티 수 라발이 요레스나 ngaranso 라발이 요레라 티네 ngaranso 마음발라 데지 덴바지 고드텔라 텐데 레종보서 티네 동할도 메덴바지 고드 레겐 바텐조 빵 텐데 인지 민지 라네나 타르토 바테 페칼치 모레
In that way, we can understand that the circumstances of our lives, including our birth and the characteristics of our physical bodies, are the result of our own previous actions. And this is important because we want to understand, and we also want to achieve a good state of existence. So by understanding that these states of existence are the results of actions, we become able to choose what we do and thereby influence what we become. Now, with regard to the results of actions, in general, according to the Buddha, there are two categories of actions affecting one's rebirth. And these are called casting actions and completing actions. Casting actions are those actions or karmas that form the karmic cause for taking a certain birth. They will cause one, for example, to be reborn in a good form of life or a negative or unpleasant form of life, and so on. Completing actions are those actions, the results of which influence what happens to you after you have been born in that certain existence. So, for example, someone could, through having a good casting karma, be reborn in a good form of life. But if they have negative completing karma, they could thereafter experience all sorts of obstacles and hardships. So there are several possibilities here. You can have virtuous casting karma and negative completing karma. You can have negative casting karma and virtuous completing karma. You can have negative casting karma and negative completing karma, or you can have virtuous casting karma and virtuous completing karma. If you think about this and you scrutinize yourself, and if you want others too, you'll start to become convinced about how this works. There's a saying about all this. If you want to know what you did, look at your body now. And if you want to know what's going to happen to you, look at your actions now. If you want to know what your actions were in previous lives, look at the circumstances with which you are presented in your present life. And you can infer to the degree that you are fortunate, to that degree you engaged in virtue in previous lives. And if you want to know what's going to happen to you in the future, look at what you're doing. If you look at your actions, your physical, verbal, and mental actions and activities, and if you can say to yourself, well, I'm behaving pretty well physically, verbally, and mentally, then you can be assured that you'll do pretty well in the future. If, on the other hand, you look at your physical, verbal, and mental activities, and you say to yourself, I'm not really behaving very well, physically, verbally, or mentally, then you can expect not to do very well in the future. The point of all this is simply that what happens to us is in our own hands. And since we all want to be happy, it's important to engage in those actions which are causes of happiness. Since we all want not to suffer, it's extremely important for us to abstain from those actions and behaviors which are causes of suffering.
Tene tateya jitanga legendary leri sedu kashiga jay zoya me pa juya me pa rapo ji song yo re de inaya te maimba tene tate le gyo sa pa te ya ta ngaran sola jase jatam pa rawang ya pa je dipa me gyo pa ya te ya jase jatam pa rawang ya pa je hindu te la tene ngara deji tan temba gudu tene gyo te dru tene dungal ta tawaji gudu dekpa me gyo te pang le da nyamon ba ten so pang kan tu ji se na tene rang deji da rang tene yena pen to pa na bote rang la pa la ye pa yin sa tene legend de pe rawan da temba ta bu ji la te tera inji minji long na tar to ba je ta rang sen be te ni ga ta ting mun ni se ge yin song be ichi ta temba je pe kal che gre tene to mo te song jo na Desi Toana Bonanjona Naruna.
Commonly, people use the word karma to mean fate. And they'll say, well, it was karma, or it's my karma. And the way they use it implies that they think of karma as some sort of irresistible force that causes an unchangeable fate. But in fact, karma, or action, is not that at all. It is not something that can't be worked with or changed. It is really the basis of our ability to control what happens to us. So karma is as much a matter of freedom as it is destiny. What happens to us is, from this point of view, 100% up to us. Because by changing and determining our actions, we can change and determine our destiny. This is something that we need to apply, and it's something that we need to resolve so that we can live consciously and choose what happens to us. I'm going to stop there for this evening, but if any of you would like to ask a few questions, please go ahead.
Good evening. You mentioned practicing impartiality is the basis before you practice compassion. So I'm wondering specifically what would be cultivating impartiality? Are there specific practices? I thought Tang Lin was learning how to be impartial, but it's actually a way to cultivate compassion. So I'm just wondering specifically how you start off practicing impartiality. Thank you.
The Shamatha ninje ke mache gona de tambo tangyon seme gongo gdo so. Tangyon seme gomta khanda yores. Chedon so konge da tonglen gomju de tangyon seme gomju yang re inang zo de Shamatha ninje gomju re. Tangyon seme la mixel gomju rabo khanda yore.
다 대라 지당게 동향심이 검지대 갈치버리세 근치롱시랑 좀 베게 단다 근상람 향능만이 송요래라 드니테 수완 힘베처나 동념대 당가란속에 제 자다 니생긴라 때네 제 초동도고 제기요래라 드니테 자다 니생긴데 나란쪽에 생기 존도하래 마도 땡땡이 하마래 라 데네 누마게 로주제요 데네 로주티나라 다점바제 마산제라 페바래 마산제라 페두데라 데네 마산티게 메티게 부구충충제 데네 코랑게 전부 지네 라피송 요아래 드니 코랑게 냐제 사요 냐샤제 사니 드니 디게 루파테 마 요아래 루파테 체체 사네 드니 체텔 히도 가마스 코로 데데 체텔 동소 다티 드라점바티 녜히 게 지두테르테 칸데 요아래 세나 teni pugu koranga pangla nyarde bate koranga tsendige drate korang pe magasa ga drawote ten korang lencha drawote koranga pugu la chene teni jambu chingu ba chungo rela ten koranga saya ga nyate teni koranga jewa ndige pate trone ten nyaga lu teni jewa langne teni te nyaga te reyo teni koranga amate trone ti chate jewa la teni kong songna teni paging hyasa mala dong dawo de ngarang pangla kur tan jitin korwa sinkitela nimbo zani mendo soje kong sonrela te ta se drada nyin sinkitela jombo sesa te tenden yo mare la hedan sesa te tenden yo mare la teacher na kangan na da boji song ta ya te bekar chim preso
Tata de pugu de amaga panla yore apaga pan Koran sine abate apaga tete kunjin longjamba ge tata de tanyon seme dambo gongo pa de kunjin longjamba song ga do tene de konzon la mashalong de palto ro mashege songredo
ore tati
tambo naso korsamne ore paltonge sambo. Generally speaking, the instruction to meditate on impartiality first is presented in such texts as the Words of My Perfect Teacher by Thrangu Rinpoche and others. And the point made in these texts of instruction is that before you can cultivate any of the other immeasurable attitudes, such as love and compassion, you have to get beyond the idea of friends and enemies, the idea of dividing beings into friends and enemies. Because although we commonly think of beings as friends and enemies. In fact, there's no such thing as friends and enemies. They don't exist. These are imaginary concepts that actually don't describe anything. In illustration of this point, the story is commonly told that the Mugajibu Rebe, Katayana. The Arhat Katayana once saw a man sitting in front of his house, and he was holding a small child in his lap. The man was eating some fish and also feeding the child, and he was throwing the bones on the ground as they were eating. And there was a dog that was trying to get the remaining fish flesh off the bones, and the man was kicking the dog away because the dog was bothering him. When Katayana used his supercognition to see what the karmic precedents of all of this were, he realized that the child in the man's lap had in his previous life been that man's worst enemy. So in other words, that man's enemy in this life had died and been reborn as his child because of the karmic debt. The fish that the father and son were eating was the father's father, who had been reborn as a fish. And the dog that the man was kicking was his mother, who had been reborn as a dog. So Katayana said about this, he's eating his dad, he's kicking his mom, he's cuddling his worst enemy. There is no point whatsoever to samsara.
So I take it then practicing impartiality is a contemplative practice, as opposed to something like sending and taking. You just reflect. Yes. Okay, thank you.
We could stop there for this evening.